Namaskar, this is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The big story remains France. The country is on fire, 5 days and counting. There have been appeals and emergency meetings, arrests, arson and looting. The protest has turned into race riots and they're testing President Macron's authority and politics. On Vantage tonight, as we bring you the latest updates, we'll also discuss why this was waiting to happen. France has changed, but its attitude and policies have not. It brought in lakhs of migrants as cheap labor and many others entered illegally. Now they can't fit in. And the government doesn't even acknowledge the problem, let alone trying to solve it. In other headlines, Joe Biden is sending another top official to China in the hope of mending ties. Jack Ma landed in Pakistan for almost a day. It's not clear why. Is Lady Justice really blind? Why do courts work overtime for the high and mighty? And is blocking the sun a viable solution to climate change? Apparently, the US is considering it. The headlines first. India to host a virtual summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO tomorrow. Prime Minister Modi will chair it. Russian President Putin is expected to address it, his first such international appearance since Wagner's short-lived mutiny. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif will also be in attendance. Saudi Arabia extends an oil production cut of 1 million barrels per day, saying this is to prop up slumping prices. Riyadh is the world's biggest crude exporter. Russia, too, will cut exports by 500,000 barrels per day. Reports of a drone spotting over Indian Prime Minister Modi's residence in New Delhi. A probe has been launched. Police and other security agencies have not found anything suspicious so far. The Prime Minister's official residence falls under the no-fly zone. Hong Kong police offer 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounties to capture 8 pro-democracy activists. All of them fled Hong Kong after China imposed the national security law in 2020. They're wanted for national security crimes and face a possible life sentence. Twitter's legal battles continue. An Australian firm has sued it for $65,000. The firm claims Twitter has not paid its bills. This is the third lawsuit against Twitter over non-payment of bills and rent since Elon Musk took over last year. And Vietnam bans the Barbie movie. This is because of scenes with a map showing China's claims to territory in the South China Sea. The movie was to release nationwide in Vietnam on the 21st of July. France is burning. I'm afraid there's no other way to put it. Vehicles are being torched on the streets, barricades have been destroyed, shops have been stormed and looted. It's like one of those zombie movies. This is what Champs-Élysées looks like. It's the most famous avenue in Paris, but yesterday it was a semi-war zone. The place is crawling with cops in full riot gear. Some armored vehicles have also been deployed. The scene is no different elsewhere. In Lyon, in Marseille, in Angers. Put together, 45,000 police officers have been deployed, around 3,000 people have been arrested, and internet shutdown is likely. The French Home Ministry is circulating an order. It says internet will be curbed starting today. They say it will prevent the misuse of social media platforms, and thank God it's in Europe. If it was elsewhere, it would have been a human rights violation, but in France, it's a precaution. Over the weekend, the scenes were ugly. Entire residential apartments were set on fire. In Lyon, shops were looted and vandalized. The police responded with tear gas and batons. The images show you how serious things are and the sort of anger there is within the French society. Yesterday night, a mayor's house in Paris was attacked. A burning car rammed into the building. The mayor's wife and child were injured.
We are not asking for unanimity, but I would never have imagined my family would be threatened with death and that there would be an assassination attempt in this beautiful commune.
The question is, how long will this continue? It's been 5 nights of non-stop violence. It all started with the killing of 17-year-old Nahel Merzouk. He was of Algerian and Moroccan descent, and he was shot during a traffic stop. The incident has exposed France's deep-rooted racism, hence the violent reaction. Nahel's funeral was on Saturday. His grandmother later had a message for all the protesters. Stop the violence, she said. Listen to this.
I blame the police officer who killed my grandson. The people who are breaking things, I ask them, stop it. They are using my grandson as a pretext. No people, just stop it. They should stop. They should not break store windows and they should not be ransacking schools.
We know how these things pan out. Yes, Nahel was the trigger, but the issue goes beyond just one person or cop, like the George Floyd killing in the US. So how is President Macron planning to handle it? Well, he's cleared his schedule. The state visit to Germany has been cancelled for one. He's also met the top ministers in his government to take stock of the situation. On Tuesday, Macron will meet 220 mayors. All of them represent towns worst hit by the riots. So that's the tactical response. But what about the political one? Macron may have condemned the police shooting of Nahel, but look at his statements afterwards. He says the rioters are young and misguided. He also says video games are contributing to the violence. Perhaps both are true. But if he thinks Call of Duty is to blame for this, he's going to have a tough time. Because there is underlying anger and underlying racism. Whether Macron likes it or not, his country is deeply divided. Chances are those divisions have grown this weekend because rioting was the red line for most people. Listen to some of them.
Very glad it is calming down, and at the same time I'm not very happy about everything we've been through, because there are people, we don't know how they managed to get their cars, their store, maybe they also took loans for what they had, and then all it takes is one night of trouble and they've lost everything. It's not their fault, everything that happened.
They're breaking things just to break things. They want to spread terror, attack elected officials and try to put the republic in danger. But I don't think they had their target on one particular individual or mayor.
This is arguably Macron's biggest test. He was voted to power as a centrist, as the man who would unite France and Europe. But now his own country is up in flames. So what will the president do next? We got a glimpse into his mindset during the pension protest. Massive outrage, but no U-turn. Macron stuck with the law despite the backlash. Will he do the same here? Well, looking at his track record, it's possible. Macron's policy on immigration and Islam has been controversial, also contradictory. He's talked about tackling radicalism, which is great, but his tactics are not helping. The French president says Islam as a religion is in crisis. Then he goes on to defend insults to the Prophet and cracks down on all mosques. Critics say this is a classic case of attacking Islam and not Islamic extremism. Plus, Macron seems disconnected with the ground reality. There are deep divisions in French society, fears about ethnic and demographic changes from migration. I'll give you an example. Some people have set up a fundraiser for the cop who shot Nahel. Think about that, a fundraiser for the man who may have started all of this. And guess how much money it's got? Almost €1 million. So don't think there is no counter sentiment. There are long-standing fears among the white population of France. As president, it is Macron's job to resolve them, to address these fears, to heal his country and his population. If not, this violence will keep flaring up. Macron could become the unique centrist who ended up dividing rather than uniting. Countries around the world are watching these events closely, including the Indian government. You see, Prime Minister Modi is expected to visit France next week. He's the chief guest for the Bastille Day event on the 14th of July. So far, there's been no change to the schedule, but a lot depends on how this week plays out. If the violence escalates again, all bets are off. So France is burning, but where did the spark come from? Last week's shooting was certainly the trigger, but the embers were already smoking by then. Why? Because of immigration. And try to understand this beyond the left-right binary. France's demography has changed a lot in the last decades. Today, there are 7 million immigrants in this country. That's around 10% of the population. So take 10 people and one of them will be an immigrant. Now, the concept itself is old in France. People began steadily migrating there by the 1830s. In the 20th century, it was considered the most open country in Europe, open arms, open borders. Many of these migrants came from French colonies, like Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. During the World Wars, France needed more manpower, so in came the migrants. But this was a colonial relationship. France was the all-conquering, civilizing power. The Arab and African migrants were just labor. It wasn't a relationship of equals. And this attitude is at the root of today's problems. Because France has never apologized for its colonial past. It hasn't accepted war crimes in North Africa, nor has it agreed to pay reparations. So in their mind, there is no problem. They say France is the land of equality, liberty, and fraternity, the temple of civil rights. Surely such a country doesn't have discrimination. Most French leaders believe this. I'll give you an example. In France, it's illegal to conduct census or surveys based on race and religion. Why? Because apparently the society is colorblind. But you see, to solve a problem, you must first acknowledge it. And France isn't doing that. By 1975, around 6% of their population was of foreign origin. They were immigrants. And that share did not change for 25 years. But in the 21st century, there was rapid growth. As I mentioned, the share is now 10%. So there was zero change from 1975 to 2000, and then a 4-point rise in the next 23 years. Where did these people come from? Around 13% of them are of Algerian descent. 12% are from Morocco. 4.4% from Tunisia and 3.8% from Turkey. So these are all non-white people, most of them Arabic, African, and Muslim. And don't think these people barged in without invites. France needed these migrants. A 2022 report claimed around 400,000 jobs are vacant in the country because there is no one to work. Why do you think Macron increased the retirement age? Because there is a labor shortage. That was one of the reasons. So France needed the foreign labor, which is why millions of people migrated in the last 2 decades. Plus, you have illegal migration. Not everyone takes the legal route into France. Many sneak in and live as undocumented migrants. There were around 200,000 of them in 2014. Now there are more than 400,000. Most of them live in close-knit communities doing odd jobs. This year, France passed a new immigration law. It's centrist, just like President Macron. It makes legalization of undocumented migrants easier. At the same time, it bolsters deportations at the border. So that's how so many migrants landed up in France. The next step was assimilation, to integrate these migrants into the French society and nation, and that is where they failed. You see, there are 2 kinds of societies in the world. One where diversity is accepted and promoted. Countries like the United States and India. You can lead your life based on your culture. Then there are places where one size fits all, like France. It doesn't matter if you're an African Muslim or an Arab immigrant. You must change your culture to live in France. You must become a so-called Frenchman. Obviously, not everyone is interested. And this has led to continued alienation of immigrants. It has created a divide. Other European countries have fared better, relatively better. Germany, for instance, has around 24% immigrant population. Yet their integration has gone relatively well. So that's one part of the problem. The immigrants are not integrated in the society. The other part is the growing fear among the white French population. Many of them are living in insecurity. What if they become a minority in their own country? What if France becomes a Muslim country? These fears are widespread, and they reflect in the rise of France's far-right parties. These people are fiercely anti-immigration, and their fears often combine with racism, sometimes very publicly. Let me show you a headline. In 2020, 2 top doctors, French doctors, had a brainwave. Why not test the Wuhan virus vaccine in Africa? As if the continent is their testing lab. It tells you how ingrained racism is. And this attitude reflects in French policing. Black and Arab people are 20 times more likely to be stopped by cops, 20 times more than white people. In the last 3 years, there have been 21 fatal police shootings. Most of the victims were black or Arab. What does that tell you? Systemic racism exists in France, but it is unacknowledged and hence festering. The immigrant population often lives in ghettos. Their unemployment rate is 12% compared to the national average of 7%. Remember, this is an estimate. You can't know the real numbers because race-based surveys are illegal in this country. But you know what? France cannot keep hiding behind its revolutionary values. Those were created for a white Christian country. It doesn't reflect modern-day France. And don't forget, those ideas of equality and liberty only applied to the white Frenchmen. In the colonies, none of those applied. And that attitude persists to this day. Let me also tell you something you may not know. Some countries in West Africa still pay a special tax to France. They call it the colonial tax. These countries use CFA franc as their currency. So they're required to store 50% of their reserves with a French central bank. The CFA franc is pegged to the euro. On paper, this may seem harmless and mutual. But look at the optics. Former colonies are paying their colonizer. All of these factors have created major fault lines in France. There is fear, alienation, and desperation. It's the perfect cocktail for disaster. So now is a crucial moment in French history. Their leaders should accept that France has changed. They brought in people for cheap labor, among other things. Now they must make room for them. If not, the cycle of violence could continue. US Treasury Chief Janet Yellen is heading to China. She'll be in Beijing from the 6th to the 9th of July. What's on the agenda? Mending the fractured US-China ties. And Yellen is not the first American official to attempt this. Last month, it was US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He was the senior-most American official to visit China in 5 years. That visit was sort of an icebreaker, but it ended in awkward headlines thanks to US President Joe Biden. You may remember this. While Blinken was in China, Biden made a rather blunt statement. He called Xi Jinping a dictator. That statement made it to the headlines. There was talk about US-China ties deteriorating further or America being confused. Because on one side, Biden was calling Xi a dictator. On the other, his foreign minister was trying to repair ties. Talk about mixed signals. But what explains this split? Why is there a gap between public statements and political moves? Because China and the US need each other. Their economies need each other. It's like being trapped in a bad relationship they can't get out of. Look at this statement by the US Treasury Department. It talked about Yellen's upcoming visit, and I'm quoting from what it said. Yellen is expected to discuss with her counterparts the importance for both countries to responsibly manage our relationship, communicate directly about areas of concern, and work together to address global changes. Responsibly manage our relationship sounds like a polite way of saying, let's dial down the rhetoric. Yellen's trip has two main objectives. One, to stabilize the relationship, meet Chinese officials, talk to American companies doing business in China, and basically do some good old damage control. The expectations are not very high, though. The idea is to avoid more friction. The second objective is debt relief for developing nations. Now, we all know that China is infamous for lending money. It's their favorite form of diplomacy. But what happens when these countries can't repay the debt? That's what Yellen plans to discuss, to use the mounting debt problem to build pressure on China. But it still begs the question, what is Washington's strategy vis-a-vis China? Are they trying to contain China or cooperate with it? Or do a little bit of both, which may be a complete botch-up? On one hand, there's talk of a Cold War, America building alliances to counter China, signing up with partners in the Indo-Pacific, cooperation in the global chip market, every effort to leave Beijing out. There are spying claims, trade disputes, and of course the Taiwan issue. On the other hand, there's the economy. The US and Chinese economies are very interdependent, and decoupling will come with widespread consequences. Do you know what the CIA chief said about this? His name is William Burns. He said a US decoupling from China would be foolish. And if you look at the numbers, you'll know why he says this. Last year, US-China bilateral trade reached a record $690 billion. Total US imports from China were $564 billion. And trade aside, their markets are closely linked. China is the second largest foreign holder of US Treasury securities. It is a record $859 billion. If China starts selling these holdings, it would disrupt the US economy. Similarly, if the US defaults on its debt, China would be in deep trouble. And this makes any sort of decoupling incredibly hard. Both Beijing and Washington, D.C. know this. And so should countries that are putting their eggs in the American basket. This Cold War between the US and China is nothing like the last one. It's very different from what played out between the Soviet Union and the US. There's a lot of money at stake. So America's political rhetoric may be heated, but the economic reality is very different, and it won't change overnight. So Yellen must go and make the most of a bad situation. And while Yellen plans to tour China, a prominent Chinese businessman is on a tour of his own. We're talking about Jack Ma, the founder of the Alibaba Group. Guess where he went last week? To Pakistan. Now, Jack Ma makes news wherever he appears, in China, in Japan, in Hong Kong. But Jack Ma in Pakistan is the stuff that headlines are made of. Stranger than usual. He took a quick trip to Lahore. It lasted less than 24 hours, but was long enough to set the rumour mills buzzing. What could this trip mean? Our report explores.
This is Jack Ma, China's one-time blue-eyed billionaire. He founded the Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba in 1999. Since then, he has amassed a fortune worth close to $50 billion. But of late, the Alibaba founder has been out of the public eye. Reports say it's because he let the wrong genie out of the bottle. He criticized the Chinese government. This was a few years ago, and his public appearances have been few and far between ever since. So naturally, whenever he resurfaces, it's big news. And bigger still when he appears in Pakistan. Yes, one of China's greatest entrepreneurs was recently spotted in Lahore. This was last Thursday. He flew down to Lahore in a private jet for a brief visit. Reportedly just 23 hours. And it was a low-profile visit. So low profile that even the Chinese embassy in Pakistan didn't know the details of his trip. He stayed at a private location. He didn't meet any government officials, nor did he speak to the media. So why was Jack Ma in Pakistan? Truth is, no one knows for sure. There's speculation about a business reason for the visit, both because of Jack Ma's legacy of founding successful enterprises and due to the people accompanying the Chinese billionaire. There was a 7-member delegation with Jack Ma. It included 5 Chinese nationals, 1 Danish person, and a US citizen. But again, any business angle is pure speculation. Some reports claim the contrary. They say this was a personal visit. Now, it might be difficult to imagine Jack Ma dropping down to Lahore to have mutton nihari and naan. But that's more likely if you believe this man. Pakistan's former chairman of the Board of Investment, Mohammad Afzal Hassan. He's the one who confirmed the news of the visit with the Pakistani media. But personal trip or not, it has raised expectations. Hassan said that the visit will yield positive outcomes for Pakistan in the days to come. Why did he say that? No reason was given. But he wasn't the only one to peddle hope. There was also Zohib Khan, the chairperson of the Pakistan Software Houses Association. He said, and we're not making this up, that although it was a personal visit, it helped enhance Pakistan's reputation from a tourism standpoint. Yes, some people are taking Jack Ma's trip as a watershed moment for Pakistani tourism. Do you blame them? When a country is collapsing economically, they need some pipe dreams to hold on to. What we can confirm is this. Jack Ma flew to Lahore from Nepal's capital, Kathmandu. Before Kathmandu, he was in the capital of Bangladesh, Dhaka. This was last Tuesday. In Bangladesh, he spent a short while at a hotel before flying out. He had a short stay at a private location. Sounds familiar? So, in the last week, Jack Ma spent a day in Bangladesh, a day in Nepal, and a day in Pakistan. After the 23 hours in Lahore, the Chinese billionaire flew off to Uzbekistan. So, he had an action-packed week. 4 countries in 4 days. That's all we know for sure. Anything beyond this is just speculation/wishful thinking. Let's wait for the dust to settle and details to emerge before getting excited about a Lahori Alibaba.
Vantage continues after a short break.
Also spoken about in the Supreme Court order as well just a few months back in the Shiv Sena case. Here, this was a clear case of anti-defection, as was being mentioned about, because the whip was that of Uddhav Thackeray as well, and this was something that even Supreme Court in fact further went and agreed to that the whip was clearly with the Uddhav Thackeray faction. So here, with the whip being with Uddhav Thackeray faction, though the questions were raised as to why did Uddhav Thackeray step down as chief minister, if he would have stayed, there was a possibility that his government could be reinstated. Here, with the number.
Have you seen statues of Lady Justice? If you have, you can't miss the blindfold. It is supposed to depict lack of bias. Justice is delivered based on facts and fairness, not outside factors. But only in theory, it seems, because Lady Justice will open the blindfold sometimes when she hears the cash registers ringing. What do I mean? Well, over the weekend, there was some interesting development at the Supreme Court of India. Now, Saturday was a court holiday, but the judges convened twice for one particular case. It's a case that relates to an activist called Teesta Setalvad. She's accused of fabricating evidence in the 2002 Gujarat riots. I'll sum up the events quickly. The High Court in Gujarat rejected her bail plea. So Setalvad moved the Supreme Court. The judges convened twice for her case, once at 6:40 p.m. in the evening and then again at 9:15 p.m. in the night. They granted her interim protection for 7 days. Now, the case itself is very polarizing. I'm sure all of you have your own opinions on it, and I do not want to go there. What I want to focus on in this, what does it take to secure justice? What does it take to get the court's attention? It helps if you're powerful and famous. And there is no ideological or political distinction here. Just think back to some recent cases. If you're a politician, you get the court's attention. Your bail hearings get fast-tracked. If you're related to celebrities, say a son or daughter, you get a fast track. If you have a top lawyer, same thing. Some big names in India charge up to anywhere between 15 and 20 lakh rupees. That's around 18,000 US dollars. I'm sure they're legal hawks and their services are probably worth every penny. But surely that should not affect the speed of justice. And how early the court takes up your case. I have some staggering numbers for you. Around 77% of prisoners in India are under trials, meaning they are in jail, but their trial has not started. 77%. That's more than 420,000 people. Who do you think these prisoners are? I'll tell you who they're not. They're not corrupt politicians and bureaucrats. They're not celebrities. They're not well-paid TV personalities either. They're ordinary citizens with no connections or power. Around 60% of them are Dalits and tribals, 60% of them. They don't have access to well-paid lawyers, hence their cases get delayed. Another staggering number is the pending cases, around 50 million of them across Indian courts. 50 million pending cases. Can you imagine that? In this judicial pile, the ordinary citizens come last. They wait years, sometimes decades for justice. But your VIPs don't. They will have expensive lawyers on call, and those lawyers will have the court's attention. It is an unfair system, and the courts know of it. The Supreme Court of India has tried to remedy the under-trial and pendency issues. They've given new orders to lower courts, like to prioritize bail over jail. But at the ground level, things are yet to change. The court can work on a holiday for an activist with a top lawyer, but will it do so for the 4 lakh plus under trials? I think we know the answer. This problem isn't about one case or one ideology or one political party. It's a question of basic freedoms and liberty. India has a rich tradition of justice and fairness. Our courts, led by the Supreme Court, have upheld that tradition. Yet there are gaps to fill. A fat wallet cannot be an early guarantee of justice. Neither can due process be expedited for the influential. I'm sure the top court knows this already. But it's all about putting the wheels in motion. And now to news from West Asia. Israel has launched a military operation in Jenin, that's a city in West Bank. And this is not just any other operation, it's one of the biggest that West Bank has seen in the last 20 years. So first, a rundown of what happened. This morning, Israel launched a series of drone attacks. They were targeting an apartment. It's located in the center of Jenin's refugee camp. It first attacked with drones. And then came the ground forces. Soon the sound of gunfire filled the streets of Jenin. Israel says it was targeting militants. It claims to have struck a command center for a militant group.
We are striking the terrorism hub with a great strength. I want to emphasize that we don't have a fight with the Palestinians. Actually, our fight is with the proxies of Iran in our region, which is mainly with the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad.
Palestine, on the other hand, calls it a war crime, an attack on defenseless people.
Our people will not stand down or surrender. We will remain in confrontation until this criminal occupation is over. The crimes in Jenin, Nablus and Gaza will not bring security to Israel as long as it attacks our people and works against the course of history.
8 people have been killed. The death toll is mounting. 50 others are injured. These are scenes we've seen before in Gaza. But for Jenin, this is the first in 2 decades, the biggest attack since the second intifada, or the second uprising. It started in the city's refugee camp. Around 14,000 people live there. In the last year, it has seen a lot of Israeli raids, but this time, residents say it looks like a real war.
What's going on in the refugee camp is real war. There were strikes from the sky targeting the camp. Every time we drive in, around 5 to 7 ambulances, and we come back full with injured people.
Israel argues the action was unavoidable. They apparently put off this operation for 2 years, but not anymore. They even had a discussion with the US. Reports say Washington was informed 10 days ahead of the raid. And no surprises there. Even though Washington does not approve of Israel's latest policies, including their settlement plans, America remains Israel's staunchest ally. And the recent tensions have not stopped Tel Aviv from acquiring a new fleet of F-35 jets. This is the world's most advanced stealth fighter jet. Israel will buy its 3rd fleet from the US. The deal is worth $3 billion, and it will be funded by US military aid. It's a win-win for Tel Aviv. In fact, Israel is the only country with F-35s in West Asia. It already has 50 F-35 jets, 50. This time, it's buying 25 more. So it will now have a fleet of 75 jets. The UAE wanted the same jets, but they don't have a deal yet. It just shows how close US-Israel ties are, irrespective of the differences. So Israel is expanding its arsenal, and it comes at a time when tensions with Iran are at an all-time high. On Sunday, Israel conducted an airstrike in Syria too. The attack was to counter Iran's presence there, disrupt its alleged arms supply to its allies in Syria. And Israel used the F-35 to shoot Iranian drones. It has used the F-35 before. In 2022, Israeli F-35s breached Iran's airspace. It gives Israel an edge in its battle against Iran. Will it target Iran's nuclear facilities next? Well, that's something we will keep tracking. For our next story, let's talk about flights. They can be stressful. But do you know what could be worse? A fellow passenger yapping away on their phone in the sky, or scrolling through loud Instagram reels sitting right next to you. Earlier, this was not allowed, thanks to the flight mode. It disables a phone's ability to connect to cellular or Wi-Fi networks. And air travelers are required to switch on this mode. But in the European Union, this guideline has met with turbulence. Airline passengers will soon be able to use their phones to full effect. And many aren't happy about this. Our next report tells you why.
Imagine being on a flight. You're soaring through the sky, looking at the clouds below. It's calm and peaceful. Your phone is on flight mode, so the usual barrage of texts or work emails don't disturb you. For a change, you take a break from that digital brick in your hand. And for a few hours, you find freedom in the sky. But if you are on a flight within the European Union, you may have to say goodbye to this experience, because air passengers in the EU will soon be allowed to use mobile phones. They won't have to enable airplane mode. They'll be able to make phone calls and use the internet. And this is all thanks to new rules that are about to take flight. They were outlined by the European Commission last year. It ruled that mobile data would be allowed on board and airlines would provide 5G technology, the high-speed mobile network. The deadline to provide this was the end of last month, so airlines are now ready for the big change. But many passengers aren't happy with it. A survey was held recently It says that 1 in 5 passengers oppose this change. 21% of the respondents were completely against it. 40% welcomed it but said there should be a limit on the usage. Now, sure, emergencies can come up. People may want to contact their loved ones on a flight or check in, even catch up on urgent work. And for this, internet is useful. But for most people, after the takeoff, it's time to switch off. It's part of the experience of a holiday, or just a digital detox before you land and get back to work. And all of this could easily be interrupted by 5G. Fellow passengers may attend calls in the sky, or loudly stream a movie, or watch TikToks. There could be ruckus on board. But apart from the anticipation, something else is irking the passengers. They're quite confused. Historically, it was understood that mobile data affects flight communications, that it interferes with the control systems, so people switched on airplane mode when on a flight. But apparently, this is not true. In fact, the concerns differ for different countries. Like in the US, 5G frequencies may hamper flight systems, even alter altitude measurements. But this is not a problem in the UK and EU, because they have different frequencies for 5G. So here, using the internet will not disrupt the flight systems, and even if there's a risk of interference, it's very small. So countries are jumping on the chance to make the most of this. And enabling 5G may be new, but in-flight internet has been around for nearly 2 decades. You can get full internet access in the skies at a premium. It costs about $5 per flight. Many flights in the US provide in-flight Wi-Fi, and now so do Malaysia and Singapore Airlines. More and more airlines are working towards in-flight Wi-Fi, but it still faces challenges. For example, the same level of connectivity mid-air becomes a challenge. So airlines are expanding their horizons, working towards death of the flight mode. And whether you like it or not, the sky is no longer the limit for in-flight connectivity.
And now to the UK, where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is struggling. He took office in exceptional times, the third Prime Minister in 2 months, the fifth in 6 years. He promised to fix the economy. He had experience, after all, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, or the UK's version of a finance minister. So this millionaire Prime Minister took office with a 5-point agenda. He promised to halve inflation, to grow the economy, reduce national debt, reduce wait times at the NHS, and stop the small boats. Basically, fiscal prudence with a dash of populism and a heavy dose of xenophobia. That's what he promised. But this agenda is falling by the wayside, so much so that he doesn't call these 5 points as 5 promises anymore. He now refers to them as 5 priorities. Similar but not quite the same. And he has reason to change his words. His agenda seems to be unravelling. We'll start with Britain's National Health Service, or NHS. It is slowly collapsing. Last Friday, it got a shot in the arm. At least that's how the UK government sold it. Prime Minister Sunak made this announcement.
We're announcing the most ambitious transformation in the way that we staff the NHS in its history, the long-term workforce plan. This is a 15-year plan to deliver the biggest ever expansion in the number of doctors and nurses that we train, and a plan to reform the NHS so we deliver better care in a changing world.
Quite the announcement. It came just days before the NHS celebrates its 75th anniversary. The Sunak government released a 151-page plan. It was to address the crisis plaguing the NHS. And what does it say? They'll increase the number of seats in medical colleges, reduce the course duration from 5 to 4 years. It may help, but it won't help immediately. The healthcare system in the UK is in crisis. They have a workforce crunch and a high rate of attrition. People are leaving their jobs. Does Rishi Sunak's plan address that? It offers flexible working, better workplace environment, and improved training opportunities, apparently. But do you know what's missing? Better pay. It's not mentioned in the list. And that's the reason why so many Britons are striking and quitting the healthcare industry. They want better pay. To be fair, Sunak has pledged more money. An additional £2.4 billion, that's about $3 billion to the NHS. And this will be over the next 5 years. And the long-term plan runs through 15 years. You know what that means. Future budget allocations will be the next government's problem, most likely not Sunak's government. So the plan is far from perfect. It's being cautiously welcomed because this is the first substantial plan in years. So you could say something is better than nothing. It may or may not save the NHS, but it's highly unlikely to save Sunak's job. Because look at how he's floundering. Inflation isn't close to getting halved in the UK. Economic growth is still projected at 0.1%. That's close to nothing. And the UK's debt is the worst in 60 years. The numbers came out last week. Debt has passed 100% of the GDP for the first time in 6 decades. So fiscal prudence is a complete failure. And then there's the issue of small boats. Sunak wants to deport asylum seekers coming to the UK by boat. His government wants to send them to Rwanda, and that too at great public expense. Now, this scheme has been championed by Suella Braverman, herself a daughter of immigrants. Now, this grand plan has hit a wall. The British courts. Listen to this.
The deficiencies in the asylum system in Rwanda are such that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. In that sense, Rwanda is not a safe third country. In consequence, sending anyone to Rwanda would constitute a breach of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which Parliament has required the government to comply with.
So the Rwanda deportation drive is also a non-starter. Sunak's government is going to appeal the ruling. It will try and convince the courts that permanently sending people to Rwanda is perfectly safe, even though experts say it will have no impact on the small boats problem. And polls say that a majority of Britons are against this policy. It's proving to be too expensive, both financially and politically, but they want to stick to it. And guess what else Sunak is turning to? Racism. He says he felt the sting of racism while growing up in the UK. Good pitch, but unlikely to win him the next election. Our planet is burning. Climate disasters are becoming extreme. Over 3 billion people are at risk of being displaced or worse. Clearly, the climate time bomb is ticking and countries are scrambling to find solutions. So far, they've made little progress, and now America may have come up with a new idea. It wants to block sunlight from reaching the Earth. As bizarre as it sounds, this phenomenon is no longer science fiction. It has made its way to legitimate debate. The question is, can it be effective? Or is it just another extreme artificial tactic to alter our atmosphere? Our next report tells you.
4.5 billion years. That's how old our planet is. Quite a long life, wouldn't you say? One filled with daily battles with the human race, because we have polluted its air and water. Strewn rubbish everywhere, over 2.24 billion tons of it, and corrupted nature. So now the world is heating up. And finally, we see how this affects us. We see how climate change harms us. When our air is too polluted to breathe, when the skies are orange from wildfires, and when billions of us risk displacement. So what do? We come up with ideas to solve the problem we have created. And if we're the US, we want to modify the atmosphere further to fight the changes we created in the first place. Sounds both confusing and disappointing at the same time? That's maybe because it is. We're talking about solar radiation modification. In simple terms, it means blocking sunlight. Yes, literally blocking the sun's rays, altering sunlight. This is seen as a potential response to fighting climate change. It sounds like science fiction, like some massive shield created by mad scientists that could protect our planet. But, believe it or not, this could actually become reality, thanks to the US. The White House has released a report. It indicates that the Biden administration wants to study altering sunlight, to research this phenomenon some more because it could potentially cool the planet. And fairly quickly, that too. But soon after this, the US ordered a review, showing certain amount of skepticism, meaning that there will be no quick decisions. For the time being, just research. But even so, this is a big deal. The US may want to undertake solar experimentation in the future. It could toy with the sun. And in the world of science, this is extremely controversial. This is not a new concept. But the reason too much progress hasn't been made here is because it divides scientists. Some say it's the last line of defense. It should only be used if and when nations fail to reduce their greenhouse emissions. You know, the gas emissions that cause global warming. But then there is another school of thought. Some experts have issued serious warnings, saying that it could make the atmosphere dependent on a particular substance. So if this stops, it could abruptly increase temperatures. The thing is, this concept is like putting an ill-fitted band-aid on the problem. For starters, it does nothing to address current problems, like reducing pollution, or the use of fossil fuels, or ocean acidification. All it does is try to deal with the symptom, which is overheating. And this report talks about a bunch of ways to limit sunlight reaching the Earth, like increasing cloud cover over the oceans, or reducing the amount of a certain type of cloud. All of these methods have risks, significant ones. And most of all, each one of them can make things much worse, like alter global weather patterns or disrupt food supplies. And, as mentioned earlier, even lead to abrupt warming. Several experts have warned against this controversial method, though for now it seems like the US is seriously considering it. And if so, the White House should know that it's playing with fire, quite literally.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Ukraine, they've released a new video of a strike on a Russian tank. This happened near the city of Bakhmut. In Mexico, a mayor married a crocodile. You heard that right. A mayor married a crocodile. As bizarre as it may sound, this is apparently a ritual that dates back centuries and is said to bring prosperity. In South Korea, a robot led a performance by the country's national orchestra. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1962, France declared the North African country of Algeria to be independent. This happened 2 days after an independence referendum was held. France ruled Algeria for 132 years. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Lakshadweep, Mohammad Faisal. I don't know about his stand yet. But what about MPs? I can tell you this. About MLAs, it will be Honorable Pawar Saab only who will be in a better position to tell how many MLAs have.
All right, Mr. Kole, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us here on Brass Tacks with your thoughts and perspectives. NCP MP who had met Ajit Pawar yesterday having a change of heart. Seems like the NCP is now split wide open. So is the Maha Vikas Aghadi. Today, Ajit Pawar and his MLAs held a press conference claiming that they are the real NCP. They claim that they have more than 40 MLAs supporting them. How can you claim when voluntarily Mr. Pawar and his band of MLAs jump ship from the NCP to join hands with the BJP Shinde Sena-led government there in Maharashtra? How can you call this a political coup of sorts?
Well, there is a split in the NCP that is very evident. Only question is how many MLAs does Ajit Pawar have?
Yeah.
If he has less than 36 MLAs, then he'll fall flat on his face. He'll get disqualified. Mr. Pawar is trying very hard to make sure that he gets more support of more MLAs. He started his campaign right in earnest from my hometown this morning, and I think a huge gathering was there to greet him. And I think he's going to hit the road and try to get maximum support of the people on the ground. So on one hand, there'll be a legal battle. Both factions have disqualified each other's leaders from the position that they were occupying. But the legal battle is one thing. The political battle on the ground has already begun. Now that political battle will tell us how many MLAs are with Mr. Ajit Pawar and how many MLAs remain with the parent party, Mr. Pawar's party.
Now, Mr. Chavan, what I want to ask you is, the point is that all of this will get proven either in a flow test if one is called for, or as Mr. Pawar said in his rallies today in different parts, that it will be settled by the people, as in when you go back to the people. That will have to be either for Lok Sabha next year or for the Vidhan Sabha election.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jambal. Big breaking news coming in at the top of the bulletin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi held a meeting with the Council of Ministers. It was a 5-hour-long marathon meeting, ladies and gentlemen. Prime Minister Modi listed out a mega plan for the government's policy agenda with a focus on the 2024 general elections. The Prime Minister called for a focus on implementation, adding that not just announcements, but execution is key. Those visuals on your screen of the meeting with the Council of Ministers. I'm joined by my colleague Payal Mehta on the broadcast. Payal, give us the details.
Well, this Council of Ministers meeting that the Minister chaired this afternoon, Ayushman, began at 4:30 in the afternoon at the Pragati Maidan Convention Center and went on till about 9:30. So that is the kind of effort that was really put in. Of course, various presentations were made for the Council to see. One of the important presentations there was the visit was done by the Foreign Affairs Ministry, which spoke about the Prime Minister's recent visit to America and Egypt. There were other presentations also which were made, but the most important takeaway from there was the Prime Minister's vision. The Prime Minister told his council very clearly that his government and he were not focused on the upcoming election alone, or not focused on 2024, but focused on making India a Vishwa Guru by 2047. That's the whole idea that with which they need to work. They need to work on 100% implementation of the central government schemes and their execution right from the top to the bottom level as well. It is important that ministers went to the ground, understood what the situation was, were able to explain to the people. A very, very critical point that the Prime Minister again made, Ayushman, was this. The Prime Minister said that, the voters of India are very smart, people are educated and people are getting smarter. So, you have to keep up with those trends and keep up with those channels. That's the message that the Prime Minister gave, and he said that unlike some of the other political parties and unlike these other governments in the past, his government was not short-sighted and his government was here to stay for a long time. So that's why they needed to look at working for the people in the longer run.
Right. Thank you, Payal, for getting us that piece of breaking news. Prime Minister Modi laying out his policy agenda to the Council of Ministers, that big pitch coming ahead of the 2024 general elections, as well as the key state elections right around the corner. But shifting focus, the political earthquake in the state of Maharashtra has the Nationalist Congress Party at its epicenter. Ajit Pawar was sworn in as the Deputy Chief Minister along with 8 other MLAs, joining hands with the BJP and the Eknath Shinde-led government in the state. Sharad Pawar, the NCP Supremo, has called this an act of treason. The party has served disqualification notices to the rebel camp, but Ajit Pawar claims he has 40 MLAs on his side, which his uncle Sharad Pawar has rubbished. However, Ajit Pawar shifting his loyalty has direct consequences for Eknath Shinde, the present Chief Minister, the BJP and opposition unity ahead of the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. For Eknath Shinde deprives his faction of its bargaining power and creates an equal competitor. Various leaders within the BJP are equally uncomfortable with the increasing importance given to defectors. Meanwhile, the weakening of the NCP affects the astute image of Sharad Pawar, who has been termed as the Chanakya for the opposition. Arguably, this jolt in Maharashtra is sending tremors to various state-centric political parties and making opposition parties increasingly nervous. Does this upheaval sound the endgame for the Mahavikas Aghadi?
बहुसंख्य आमदार हे राष्ट्रवादी काँग्रेस पक्षाबरोबर आमच्या बरोबर आहेत. आम्ही सगळेजण एकत्रपणे काम करतोय. पुढेही आम्ही महाराष्ट्राच्या भल्याकरता काम करत राहणार. राष्ट्रवादी काँग्रेस पक्षाच्या बळकटीकरणाकरता काम करत राहणार. आणि तसंच देश पातळीवर जे नरेंद्र मोदी साहेबांचं नेतृत्व आहे त्या नेतृत्वाखाली देश जो आगेकूच करतोय त्याचाही पाठिंबा देत त्या गोष्टीला त्याच्यामध्ये त्या केंद्राचा फायदा देखील राज्याच्या विविध विकास कामांच्या करता जो निधी लागतो, परवानग्या लागतात, इतर काही गोष्टी लागतात, त्याचा पण त्याच्यामध्ये व्हावा.
स्थापना दिवस के निमित्त 21 जून 2023 को मुझे हमारे राष्ट्रवादी कांग्रेस पार्टी का राष्ट्रीय कार्यकारी अध्यक्ष नियुक्त किया गया और उसी के तहत मैं मेरी जिम्मेदारी पार्टी के कार्यकारी अध्यक्ष के नाते निभा रहा हूं. इसके पूर्व सितंबर 2022 में पार्टी का नेशनल एक अधिवेशन हुआ था. उस अधिवेशन में के बाद पहली बार राष्ट्रवादी कांग्रेस पार्टी के उपाध्यक्ष के नाते, क्योंकि ये पोस्ट पहले नहीं थी, मुझे नियुक्त किया गया था.
अब कांग्रेस की रणनीति क्या रहेगी? कांग्रेस किस प्रकार से ये जो एनसीपी में स्प्लिट हुआ है उसको देखती है?
कांग्रेस की रणनीति तो ये है कि हम तो काम करते हैं, आपके जो राज्य घटना है उसके मुताबिक काम करते हैं. हमारा तत्वज्ञान भी राज्य घटना का तत्वज्ञान है. वैसे आपकी जो प्रजातंत्र है उसके लिए काम करने वाले हम हैं और आगे जाके भी प्रजातंत्र के लिए और आपकी राज्य घटना के लिए हम काम करने वाले हैं. तो आगे करते रहेंगे. महाविकास आघाड़ी बन के बीजेपी का विरोध करना ये भी हमारी तो काम की जिम्मेदारी है, वो भी निभाएंगे. नहीं, कांग्रेस के तो अभी हमारी संख्या बल है वो सबसे ज़्यादा तो हमारा रहेगा महाविकास आघाड़ी में भी. तो विपक्ष का नेता तो कांग्रेस को ही मिलेगा, उसमें कोई सवाल अलग हो नहीं सकता. और हम अभी पूरे महाराष्ट्र में ये काम करने वाले महाविकास आघाड़ी बन के या कांग्रेस बन के. और बीजेपी का और ये सरकार, नया सरकार अभी तो और नया बन गया है. जो शिंदे सरकार था, फडणवीस का था, उसमें अजित पवार जाके मिले हैं. इसके बारे में लोगों में जो राय बन रही है वो तो उनके आगे बन रही है, उनके विरोध में बन रही है. लोगों को बिल्कुल पसंद नहीं ये सरकार बनी है. तो हम जो लोग भावनाएं उनके साथ है, उनको साथ में, लोगों को साथ में लेकर हम महाविकास आघाड़ी हमारे सत्ता पर 2024 में जरूर आएगी, ऐसा मुझे लगता है. और हमारा जो इलेक्शन पार्लियामेंट का होने वाला है उसमें भी हम अच्छा प्रदर्शन करेंगे.
It seems like the NCP is now split wide open. So is the Mahavikas Aghadi. Today, Ajit Pawar and his MLAs held a press conference claiming that they are the real NCP. They claim that they have more than 40 MLAs supporting them. How can you claim when voluntarily Mr. Pawar and his band of MLAs jump ship from the NCP to join hands with the BJP Shinde Sena-led government there in Maharashtra? How can you call this a political coup of sorts?
Well, there is a split in the NCP that is very evident. Only question is how many MLAs does Ajit Pawar have?
Yeah.
If he has less than 36 MLAs, then he'll fall flat on his face, he'll get disqualified. Mr. Pawar is trying very hard to make sure that he gets more support of more MLAs. He started his campaign right in earnest from my hometown this morning, and I think a huge gathering was there to greet him. And I think he's going to hit the road and try to get maximum support of the people on the ground. So on one hand, there'll be a legal battle. Both factions have disqualified each other's leaders from the position that they were occupying. But the legal battle is one thing. The political battle on the ground has already begun. Now that political battle will tell us how many MLAs are with Mr. Ajit Pawar and how many MLAs remain with the parent party, Mr. Pawar's party.
Now,
The
Mr.
magic
Chavan,
number
what I
being
want
36.
to ask you is,
Mr.
the
Ajit.
point is that all of this will get proven either in a flow test if one is called for, or as Mr. Pawar said in his rallies today in different parts, that it will be settled by the people, as in when you go back to the people. That will have to be either for Lok Sabha next year or for the Vidhan Sabha election next year, and it's not going to happen in a hurry. So by then, don't we know, or we don't know what shape or form the assembly will take? Do you believe that as they stand today, that the NCP and Sharad Pawar Senior have lost control of this party, the NCP?
No, I don't think more MLAs are gone. But whether the question ultimately, as in the case of Shiv Sena, same thing is with NCP, whether people, after all, party is not just MLAs, party is not affluent bearers, party is the cadres, party is the workers on the ground. Who has the support of larger number of people in the ground, that is very crucial. The same thing will happen in case of Shiv Sena split. But there is no time to prove it because there are no elections. The Shinde-Fadnavis government dare not hold elections without causing break in the NCP, with a break in the MVA. They succeeded in causing a break in Shiv Sena earlier, now they caused a break in NCP. But even then, I don't think they are in a position even to expand the cabinet or to hold long overdue local body elections, which are due for more than a year and a half. So I think BJP is not sure of its Maharashtra strength. Without breaking up parties and without poaching MLAs from other parties, they will not be able to face any election, whether Lok Sabha election or any other election.
No,
This
you
is the
said,
preparation for
Mr.
Lok Sabha
Chavan,
election.
that the Congress will become the largest opposition party in Maharashtra after the split, both within the Shiv Sena and now within the NCP as well. You also said that you will lay claim to the post of leader of the opposition, but doesn't this risk alienate